What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. And if this is your first time here, thanks for coming. Today we're going to be doing a set of glow plugs and a glow plug controller on this 335D. As you get higher mileage, actually I'll show you this part number here for this glow plug controller. As you get higher mileage in these BMWs, the glow plugs start to go bad. You'll get a fault code for activation for one. You go through the trouble of taking the intake manifold off to replace the one. Put everything back together, a couple weeks, a month later, you get a fault for an activation for another one. You're back in there taking the intake manifold back off. Whether you're doing this yourself or paying for somebody else to do it, it can get very costly if you continue to go back in there and do one at a time. So I recommend doing all of them while you have it off. I know it's a little bit more expensive, but it saves you the cost of labor of having to keep going back in there in order to replace the rest of them, one at a time. Also, what can happen is when the glow plug goes bad, it can actually damage the glow plug controller. I've seen it to where they've damaged the glow plug controller initially, and then it takes a week or a month after you put a new glow plug in it for it to show problems or come back as having a bad glow plug controller. So just this preventative maintenance slash if you have a fault for a glow plug right now, just plan on doing all 6 glow plugs and the glow plug controller. Save yourself the trouble, save yourself the time. So we're going to get everything pulled apart here. As you can see, I've got a lot of stuff already pulled off, intake hose, cowl, all that stuff. Cowl is pretty simple. It's a bunch of 8s holding the microfilter onto the cowl there at the windshield, and then some 8s holding it down to this under tray that sits here. And then that under tray is 8s on either side. Pull that out. We're going to take both of these strut tower bars out, these cross braces out, in order to be able to get this plastic trim off the back here. And then we're gonna have to take our intake manifold off to get to them because they're actually underneath there. So I'm gonna get this intake manifold off. I'll show you guys what has to come off in order to do that, and then we'll get the glow plugs replaced. I got the rest of the intake manifold trim here off. The 2 screws on either side that hold those strut tower braces on the strut towers themselves are E14s. And then in here in the back, underneath this little cap here, actually goes over top of this hole. Put a little flat blade screwdriver in here, twist this a quarter turn, it pops this plug out. And then there's an E14 screw in the back underneath here. Just loosen this screw up. You do not have to remove it all the way. Take the 2 screws on either side after loosening that E18 back there. And then the 2 cross braces are actually like forked at the back so that you can get them out from underneath that bolt without having to take it out all the way. I got those out. This trim back here has to come out. There's a 10 on either side and another 10 here in the middle that holds this cowl, under cowl piece on. Once you get that out, there's 2 more 5mm Allens here on this cover that cover out the back half of this intake manifold. Take that out. To take the intake manifold out, plug connection wise, you have a manifold pressure sensor here. Back here underneath, right here, there is a connector, which is this connector right here for these swirl flaps. There's 2 locking tabs on either side of it right here that you press in towards the middle of the connector and pull the connector towards the back of the car. There is a 10mm screw holding your dipstick tube to your intake manifold. You're going to want to take that out as well. And then coming up front here, we have the EGR valve plug connection here. You have your throttle connection here, which is this wiring. You're going to have your quick disconnect style, like snap ring or snap clip style intake hose that you pull off here. And then your EGR temp sensor had some clips that were holding it here to the top of this intake. Just pop those clips off and set that off to the side. Once you get all that stuff out of the way, there's 11s in here in between the intake runners all the way back. And then up here, all the way across this top at the valve cover is a bunch of 10s. You want to do all those, your intake manifold pulls right out. So let's get this intake manifold pulled out. All right, we got our intake manifold pulled off. These right here are your glow plugs, all 6 of them. And then right here is your glow plug controller. Glow plug controller has 2 10s holding it to a bracket down there, and the plug connections are in the bottom of it. We're going to do the glow plugs first. I'm going to show you guys how to do that. These are actually really simple. On the sides of these, there's like 2 tabs that as you just heard, they click. When you squeeze them in, they'll click, and then you can just pull the connector off of the glow plug. So, tab right here, tab right there on the other side. Squeeze those 2 tabs in towards the middle, pull up the glow plug, and then you have your glow plug down in there. Now, glow plug is a 10 millimeter. There's a special socket that that BMW supplies. I actually purchased it myself, so I have it because I've done quite a few of these glow plugs. 10 millimeter socket, take those off. It's actually like a longer reach than a normal 10 millimeter like deep socket. They make 10 millimeter sockets that are like fender washer sockets that will work for this as well. I've seen other people use that, but I actually have the special socket. So we're gonna get these glow plugs swapped out, and then I will show you guys how to do the glow plug controller once we get the glow plug swapped out. All right, so special socket, take your connector off your glow plug, and then just break them loose. Some of them are going to be a little bit tighter than others. If you start to take them off and feel like they're really, really tight, or as you break them loose, they start to get kind of tight unscrewing them, spray some PU blaster down in there to penetrate through that, anything that might be gummed up on here. These actually look pretty bad. That white stuff that's on the end of the glow plug is actually just some buildup on there. Most of the ones that I see go bad have that white buildup on the end of them, and then if you compare other cylinders on the same engine that didn't have a fault to them, they won't have that white buildup on there like that. So I think this white buildup is actually an indication that the glow plug is starting to fail or has failed. So it's a good thing we're replacing these. So we're going to continue with replacing the rest of the glow plugs here, and I'll get into detail on replacing that glow plug controller down there. All right, so we got all 6 of our glow plugs replaced. We're working on getting the glow plug controller replaced now. I wanted to show you guys. It's kind of hard to see. If you look right there, like right here, you see a stud there? That had a 10 millimeter nut on it. There's also another one on the other side here that had another 10 millimeter nut on it. That's actually these 2 things right here that are holding your glow plug controller on. And then your plug connection here on the bottom, this bigger one, is 2 pinch tabs. The one on the back's a little hard to get to, but you can reach your finger around behind it and pinch it, pull it off. And then this one, there's not really any tactful way to get this off other than just pulling on it. In lieu of pulling on the wiring, because that's not really a good idea, from up top you can actually look down and see there's like ridges into this connector here where it plugs into the bottom. Stick a screwdriver down in there and just kind of like bump it with the back of your hand, and it'll knock this connector out of this glow plug controller. It's really just has a little bit of tension here on these 2 little tabs here holding that connector in. So once you get these 2 connectors pulled out, get the 2 10s pulled off, you can get that glow plug controller out of there. You got to snake it out of there a little bit. It's not super, it's not easy to get out, but it will come out of there. You don't have to take any of the other stuff in here out of the way. So I'm going to get this glow plug controller swapped out, and we'll get our intake manifold back on, and we'll be done with everything here. All right, so we got all of our new glow plugs and new glow plug controller, and the only thing left to do is to put everything back together. So that's going to be putting your intake manifold back on, hooking your intake pipe and everything back up. One thing I do have for this car, which you may or may not have depending on your situation, is I have a new intake manifold to go back on this thing. We're replacing it just due to there's carbon buildup in the old one. It's not the worst I've seen, but just if you're going to go in there and go into this detail and doing this emissions delete and everything like that, I'd recommend replacing the intake manifold too while you're in there. Just, it's hard to get all of the carbon out from inside of here. There are some shops that I've dealt with before that will actually hot tank these and clean these all out. But the intake manifold was cheap enough that it was just easier to replace the intake manifold. So we're going to replace that. While we have this intake manifold out of the car, we're actually going to be doing our swirl flap delete as well. So I'm going to start taking things apart, and I'm going to go through with you guys what has to come off in order to do that delete. Alright, so I'm going to show you on this old intake manifold how to take this off, because this is what you're going to be dealing with. My replacement intake manifold actually had a vacuum swirl flap actuator. I've really never seen that before. American cars have a electronically controlled one. That intake manifold must be off of a European or something like that. Just not something you're used to dealing with. So to take yours off, you're going to take these two T20s out here. This swirl flap motor slides out of these slots here on the intake manifold out this way. And then once you slide that out, you're going to pop this rod out of this little retaining groove that it's sitting in the intake manifold. The only reason why you have to do that is so you can get access to the screws across the bottom, because as you can see, they're covered up by that rod. You take that rod out, you take all of your T20s out of all your swirl flaps, stick a screwdriver in here along the edge of them and just twist it, and it'll pop the swirl flaps out. And then when you're going back together, you put your swirl flap delete plates in here like this. Actually look like this. Just make sure that you get them in there. Make sure that the O-ring doesn't roll over or anything when you're going back in there. It just kind of seats in there. And then put your T20s back in these, screw them back in. Swirl flap delete's done. You don't have to put any of the thing back on. You can put the motor back on if you want and plug it back in to prevent there from being faults for the motor not being there, but it's eventually going to set a fault for the swirl flaps not opening and closing as their commands anyway, so it's not really worth it. When you do this, you're obviously going to go with the tune that deletes the swirl flap actuation, so having the motor there is not a big deal. So we're going to get this intake manifold back on and be done with this job. All right, so as you guys can see, not too difficult to do the glow plugs and glow plug controller on this car. Although the intake manifold seems a little bit intimidating, it's really not that hard to take off. It's much easier than some other BMWs. If you guys have any questions about this job, please comment down below. I'll be sure to answer anybody's questions. I would really appreciate it if you guys would subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys later.